do you want to
or words do people do?
Coming back on the
it's pretty easy to that same kind of yeah, no, it's not wide, but being an island, of course, it's got lots of opportunities.
Okay, councillors,
We're at a wedding.
Meeting open again. Welcome back. We're at item 2 on the agenda, which is the development application for operational works and advertising device at Unit 1, 100 Reedy Street, Noosaville. It's been referred here for further consideration. Councillors, we have questions.
I have questions as I referred to this meeting. Thanks. I wonder if you could just start with explaining the reason why this particular application has come to council. What's the background and why is it here?
Well, council approved the building, and on that building it did show compliance signs, which all were fine. It's been built. Our compliance officers go out, as they do for all the sites, look at it. Noticed by eye that the sign appeared larger than a 4x1 and used a measuring device to get an idea of that size that confirmed, yes, it's definitely over 4. Contacted the applicant who didn't contest that, yes, it's larger, and we have plans and we will apply, and that's what we're assessing now, their application in response to our compliance officers assessing the built form.
So basically there was an application which was approved and they didn't comply with the original size of the signs.
Yeah, so
they put in an application which showed compliant signs, but they didn't build.
They didn't build accordingly. Yeah. So I just want to explore the context that we're operating in at the moment. The draft new Noosa plan does not include signage regulation, and as I'm aware that this is because it's intended to have a local law cover this instead, and so I'll probably ask Kerry about this. If you could explain what the process and time frame is going to be for the development of this local law.
So with the draft local law, there is a draft that's been prepared by officers, and that is intended to be reported to council next round in order to review that and decide on a draft that we would go out to community consultation with. Once we go through community consultation, we would need to consider those submissions and make amendments if we thought that was appropriate based on submissions. Before we go, it needs to go out to the state and do a state check as well, and then the intent is to have it take effect at the same time as the new planning scheme.
So when is the draft likely to go out into community consultation?
So after May's meeting.
After May's meeting.
Yeah.
And I guess there's another contextual thing of interest.
Sorry, yes. Councillor, we do have to go to the state before public consultation.
State first,
yes.
And then to the meeting.
Yes.
So it may not get to the May meeting.
Yeah.
No. It goes to the May meeting.
Then it goes to the state, and then public consultation. Okay. So it might be a little later. It depends. Yeah.
That's right.
And the other contextual matter is, I understand council is currently carrying out an audit, and I'm aware of this. Can you tell us about the time frame of the audit of signage around the Shire and when it is likely that the industrial areas are going to be audited?
Mm-hmm. So currently we have audited Tewantin, Noosa Junction, Hastings Street, and we're currently in the Noosaville area around the Noosaville Shopping Centre, Mary Street and Thomas Street, so we're in that area. When we finish that area, we intend to move to the hinterland areas and then come back to the industrial area. So by the time the audit's not predicted to be finished until next June, so it takes some time. So I'd expect early next year, mid next year, we would be auditing the industrial area.
So you're thinking that the audit of the industrial area is likely to happen after the new Noosa plan and the
Yes,
local law are in
yes.
place?
Yep.
And is the audit that is taking place at the moment and on an ongoing basis always asking people to comply, businesses to comply
Yes.
to the existing
It
local
is.
law?
As we go around and measure the signage and provide information to people,
Mhm.
we're pointing out where people don't comply with the current signage requirements and asking them to comply. Where officers think there may be changes in the signage requirements, we are bringing that to people's attention as well.
What do you mean by that?
Officers are proposing some changes to the signage requirements for Noosa. But of course that's for council to decide, and we're flagging that there's a review happening and we are considering some changes.
So just to understand that, so you may not be requiring everyone to comply to the existing.
No, we are requiring
You
everyone
are.
to comply with the existing.
But then they're told that may change. That's
Yeah.
they're alerted to that.
They're
but
alerted to that.
But if they have to spend money to change their sign size,
right.
they still have to do
Yeah,
it.
and with the audit and the compliance, some signage has been there for quite some time. So some people are asking for sort of 6 months or a year even to address their signage and make it comply, because some of their signage is quite new and it's costly. So we're giving people an opportunity to address that.
So another question linked with this would be, given that the draft of the local law will assumably come out in June or something like that, is there any intent to establish some sort of moratorium between a point of the draft coming out and the point at which it becomes the actual local law? And that's because I'm thinking there will be other applications and development approvals during that period, which could be very close to a new local law where things are changing. So
where there are significant changes in the signage requirements that's proposed, we are considering whether that may be appropriate in some instances, and that will form part of the report to council in May.
okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Wellington,
I'll move the recommendation. I think there's a
seconded by
Typo.
Councillor Glasgow, moved by Councillor Wellington.
in part B it says the proposed advertising devices is not designated, so remove that S for me please, Kylie. Thanks.
Do you want to put an I in significance? Oh, that's signpost, sorry. I'm wrong.
Sorry.
That's
Okay,
probably
Councillor
2
Wellington.
words.
Look, fundamentally, the applicant has not adhered to the approved conditions of the development. The plans were approved in February 2018, and those plans included 2 signs of 4 square metres each. If the applicant was unhappy with those conditions, that would have been the time to challenge them at that time, not now. Instead, what we have is plans relating to signage that were accepted. The applicant has subsequently breached those approved submitted plans, and now we have the matter before us. I note that the subsequent to a successful legal challenge by a neighbouring business and due to the wording of our planning scheme at the time, for a brief moment there, signs larger than 4 square metres were allowed. However, following legal advice at the time, Council amended the wording in its planning scheme to better prescribe the 4 square metre rule that was the intention of the scheme prior to that legal challenge. It'd be somewhat absurd after going through all that process for Council now to fail to support its own scheme amendments after we've gone through the rigorous process of having to change our planning scheme, which is not a simple matter. On this issue, I think consistency and precedent are significant. As soon as Council fails to support its own planning scheme on any matter, including something as simple as signage such as this, we leave a gap, a yawning gap for other businesses or other applicants, etc., to exploit. And we also establish a failure by Council to be consistent with regard to supporting its own scheme, and that can play out in future challenges to both the scheme and Council's decision-making process. That's why consistency is always important. And finally, if we're not consistent here, we undermine the excellent work the council staff have been doing in the signage audit around the Shire. And I remind councillors that that audit process has resulted in very little pushback or blowback, very few complaints. The staff are involved. Jamie has done a fantastic job dealing with businesses and residents and property owners in the Shire. And on the whole, they have agreed to be compliant because they understand that what we're trying to create here is not just an ideal visual amenity, but also a level playing field for all businesses. So on the basis of consistency, I think it's really important that we support the staff recommendation here, and my motion suggests that.
Councillor Terrace.
Can I ask a question? With regard to the actual, if you take out the red surround and just use the lettering, does the lettering Actrol TM actually constitute 4 square metres, or is it larger than 4 square metres?
I haven't applied an area to the word,
have we actually applied the measurement to the letters?
No, we've applied the measurement to the
the
device,
entire sign.
which is the entire sign.
That's right. Look like I'll do it.
Councillor Terrace.
This is where our signage laws challenges me, because I think, look, I understand that it doesn't comply with the plans, and I agree that the original plans were 4 metres by 1 metre, and that in this case the applicant hasn't adhered to their original plan, and we cannot not approve this. But when you look at that building, the size and scale of it, and the large area, and of course another building could be built in front of it. I mean, one of those signs is going to be obscured from the main street and only going to be viewed from a particular angle. And the window sign, calling the window sign a window sign challenges me, because to me it's an advertising device. I think there's a differentiation between advertising devices and signage. But under the way the rules are written at the moment, it constitutes a window sign, and I can see that we can't necessarily approve any of this. But having said that, I think that this actually is in keeping with what we're trying to achieve with regard to signage. It's minimal, it's proportional, and it's inoffensive. I mean, had the building been painted bright red and the words Actrol were there on their own, and the letters Actrol were there on their own, could we have done anything about it? Or conversely, if the building was white and the letters were red against a white background, they may constitute in the size. But because we take the surround as well as the letters, we get a far larger sign area than would otherwise be there, because there's a corporate colour involved in the background. So look, whilst I can't, I support the staff recommendation here with regard to this not complying with the original development. I see, and that this gives us some food for thought with regard to the signage rules going forward and the local laws that we're looking at implementing and putting up for public comment. And I'll welcome public comment with regard to elements of the signage laws when and if they are, or when they are put up for public comment.
Councillor
Yes,
Jensen.
I'd like to speak. I'd like to support both what Councillor Wellington and Councillor Jurusevich have just said. First of all, I do think that if Council approves a application, there is an expectation that people will adhere to that. And of course, even in our process of seeking an audit and compliance, we are ensuring that everyone is treated the same way. So I think that unfortunately in this case, where there is a set of rules that we have in place, everyone needs to have the same, adhere to the same rules. At the same time, I've gone out and had a look at the actual location, and the building itself is set back from the street. The sign doesn't appear all that large to me from it, because you're not even right next to it. You're looking further back into building set back. The window sign is so minimal you barely notice it's there from the street. So like Councillor Jurusevich, I think in the future, when we're looking at our future requirements, these things should be taken into consideration. Size of building vis-a-vis size of sign, and the locality of the building. But of course that is not the case for this particular application. I appreciate the concept that perhaps there will be consideration of some sort of moratorium once the local law is on its way to being turned into a actual requirement, because there may be some changes, and I look forward to seeing that in May and then getting feedback from people after that. But yes, I support the proposed motion.
Councillor Parton?
Yeah, I support the motion for all the reasons Councillor Jackson said and Councillor Jerusalem. Going forward, I guess in a lot of ways I'm the councillor who suggested we might have a look at the industrial precinct as a separate precinct because of the sheer size and scale of the buildings up there. And in discussions that we've had recently and going forward with what we might do under local law, in fact we might allow larger area signs on some of these large buildings in the industrial estate. And the reasons why we might is what Councillor Jerusalem alluded to, size and scale. And that's where I always battle with planning. One size fits all. Well, no, it doesn't. It never has and never will. Whether it's the size of a block of land, areas, whether it's hills, slopes, whatever, or building size, etc., shop size, etc. One size never fits all. But that's going forward. So I'll support this at this point in time, but I'll flag in the future that I'll be looking for options for that industrial estate where they may allow larger signs. Also, with regards to window signs, I've already had to say recently in a meeting with councillors, I have a view on window signs. There might be a view through the windows of the window signs. And I guess it relates back to whether a person owns a big industrial shed up there, or whether a person leases a shop, or he might own his own shop. Would you impose that on a homeowner, that type of thing? Well, I think not, because you might run into trouble if you start prescribing for houses. But we seem to be happy to prescribe for businesses, minority groups, if you like, and I don't really like it. So for all those reasons in the future, I'll be looking at our local law and how we might progress that.
Thank you, Councillor Parton. Councillor Stockwell.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think number one on this one came to mind was we shouldn't reward seeking forgiveness, not permission. And this is quite different a case to people who may have unknowingly breached the requirements of a development application. And such, the fact that it is a new business and sought to get retrospective approval for not complying with the conditions is one that doesn't endear itself to me. I think when we do these things, and what councils have been talking about, where there may be room to look at the proposed local law, we always have to look about the predominant purpose of our signage bylaw is to protect the streetscape and the Noosa image as being low-key, less congested. And we know when it goes too far, the court ordered storage first sign goes far too far. You know, when you drive along that street, you get what we're trying to avoid. So if we have one sign to say, well, that's what we don't want, we've got it there. We know this one isn't as garish, isn't as come look at me, isn't all multicoloured, but the sake is it's twice as much as it is currently provided for, and I think the refusal is the only way ahead.
Councillors, as with the last item, all the key points of the arguments have been very capably covered, but it's agreed that minimising commercial signage is one of the approaches this council has taken to setting it apart from other local government areas. And in this case, the submitted plans showing compliance signs did not reflect what were built on the building once it was completed. There was consideration given to signs larger than 4 square metres on surrounding buildings, and they were approved after a court process, and there was an identified weakness in the Noosa planning scheme as a result. So we, as a council, responded to that with some amendments which we all approved and were brought into effect in 2017. And this is the first opportunity, to my knowledge, where we've been asked to support those planning scheme amendments. So to not do so would seem counterproductive and not understandable from my perspective. So of course I support the motion. Councillor Wellington, wish to close? I put the motion. Those in favour? Against? The motion's carried.
I would move that the next item be held over to the last item on the agenda.
That's a good call. Thank you, Councillor. Item 3, which is confidential, will move to the end of the agenda, which takes us to item 4, which is... Oh, sorry. We've got a mover and a seconder. When all in favour? Against? Carried. And we'll go to item 4, which is the Noosa North Shore Ferry Service Review and Lease Extension. We welcome Michael, Dennis and Clint. That was referred here due to the significance of the issue. And Councillor Pardon, you have
I wish to declare conflict of interest in this matter, as I'm subsidised for the crossing of that ferry. And I ask that I be excused from the meeting.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Pardon. This item is on page 13 of the Services and Organisation Committee meeting agenda. We'll wait for the CEO to come back. Okay. Councillors, you have questions for staff? Councillor Jackson.
Question. I was interested to see that there's a recommendation for a 5-year extension, which is part of the lease currently, and a suggestion that it be delayed by those 5 years to review whether digital payment might be included as part of the way people can pay. Recently I happened to be in Brisbane at a market, and somebody had one of those EFTOS machines that was based on mobile network, not on internet. Just a little machine, really easy, stick in your credit card, punch in your number, and it worked as a payment. So I'm not sure I understand why it's recommended that for 5 years this not be reviewed.
In reality, we need to look at those requirements in the lead up to going out to tender, and to allow potentially a new operator to take over the ferry operation and potentially commission new ferries. In reality, we're probably looking at going out to tender midway through this 5-year period. So it will logically form part of the next tender package and our exploration of what operators can provide as far as the service goes. And I think in reality we'll be out to tender midway through this 5-year period to allow for the potential for a new operator to be the successful tenderer and then commission new ferries and the long lead-in time that's required to allow for a new operator, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, okay, I understand that a bit better now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, Councillor Stockton.
Is there anything in the current lease arrangements that stipulates methods of payment?
It stipulates the requirement for paper tickets to be issued, but not method of payments. I don't know where.
Paper tickets. There you go.
And it talks about keeping ticket books for audit purposes and so forth, which is how it's operated.
So that does lock you into 20th century technology, okay?
19th century technology.
My understanding is you're recommending a trial, a period where this new technology can be trialled and then any cost implications factored into a new tender, is that correct?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, I think what needs to happen with this is that we give ourselves time to look at the full cost and the implications of the technology prior to us going out to tender. So in essence, that's exactly what we're talking about. We want to make sure there's business continuity, there's service that can continue to be provided to people crossing the ferry, and that needs some time to implement. So I would suggest through a trial.
So if like we all are hoping to move towards this more mobile technology eventually, but if council was to mandate that as part of this process now, it would be very problematic and perhaps inequitable for the ferry operator.
Yes, it could be, and the implications are unknown at this point, and contractually there could be some issues in terms of the current arrangement as well. So that's why we're taking more of that stepped approach.
So to be clear, the extension of the current lease requires the original conditions of the lease to continue. Therefore, there is no opportunity for council to impose changes to those conditions unless they happen to be negotiated appropriately with the operator. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. We also have to keep in mind that when this was tendered some years ago, those conditions were set as part of the tender. So you'd be looking at, our procurement advice is that you would be looking to variations to the contract, which at the time somebody was also putting in for it. That was not foreseen, and that can create some contractual problems for us to vary it now.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, John.
I'm going to move that this matter be deferred for a decision to the ordinary meeting on Thursday night.
Seconded, Councillor Stockwell.
So can I ask a further question?
Of course you can, John.
With regard to the extension, because the original lease was a 10-year term and a 5-year extension, there's no. Is it possible to apply anything less than a 5-year extension?
There is. The clause reads up to 5 years. Up
to 5 years. So what we could do is actually implement a shorter extension period, which would give us time to investigate the opportunities here for 21st century ticketing and online booking provisions potentially, and then have a tender perhaps in 2 years' time rather than 5 years' time.
Well, as I was saying to Councillor Jackson, I would anticipate that we need to be ready to go out to tender in 2 to 2.5 years' time to allow for a new operator to gear up to commission new ferries.
But typically we wouldn't take a 2.5 year time for a tender to go out. A tender would normally be, what, 6 months before a tender's due?
Well, it's just that lead time to commission new ferries for a new operator.
So, okay, you're envisaging that there may be new hardware incorporated.
You've just got to allow for it, I think.
Okay, so to give that ample provision as well. Sorry, that wasn't anything that I understood from the report, that actually new ferries could be a part of.
To be clear, we're not envisaging anything, but
it is a possibility.
It's always a possibility with tendering.
Okay, thank you.
So in line with Councillor Jerusalem's question, in that case, is it also possible to therefore have a shorter renewal of the lease and begin that tender process much earlier?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I think there's two distinct issues here. One's the contract and service delivery across the river, which staff here and ourselves are trying to going through the normal process. The other issue is getting into the 21st century with technology, which we all think that has to happen. I think for me it's fairly simple as it, and we put that in the recommendation. We explore the technology with a view to working with the operator who we've had a long-standing relationship with over 20 years. Make sure the risks of that technology introduction are mitigated, and there's a number of risks there, of course. There's technology risk in terms of connectivity, change management risks for their staff, all those type of things. The last thing we want is someone on the ferry with 20, 30 cars behind them and their tap doesn't work because connectivity's been lost. So you're back to square one, aren't we, with, rather than giving over his loose change. So we need to have, okay, what's the contingency plans for payment? So you've got to have multiple payment types. those type of things we've got to explore. Probably then, as Clint mentioned, if there is then potential soft introduction, then we work with the operator to do that. We test and trial, and as Dennis mentioned, then gradually we move into that new contract or the new tender, and then if everything goes well and it works, you go, well, sorry guys, as Ingrid mentioned, we're potentially going to a full digital solution, which I think is the way forward. In probably 10 years' time, that'll be digital payments will be the norm rather than cash.
10 years ago.
Just a quick question, I should know the answer, so don't. The extension can be up to 5 years. Is that at our option or their option to nominate what that time frame is?
Good question.
The request has come in for 5 years. The clause is fairly brief and it just says by mutual agreement.
Okay, so both parties would have to agree for 3 or 2 or 5, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think we're talking to the deferral motion. I think there is a range of other issues that councillors may wish to
talk to the deferral motion. Yeah.
That's right. You
I haven't
moved.
spoken to it yet.
So I was going to speak to it.
If you have a question?
No.
I have a question. Yes, Councillor Glasgow.
Can the Mayor please explain the deferral motion?
Yes, I'll speak to the motion. Look, Michael correctly noted 2 issues. One is the lease issue and the other is exploring new technology for payment systems. But there's another aspect to all of this that no one's spoken of and we can't go to any great detail on, and that is that the Tiwa Kalula working group is looking at impacts on Tiwa Beach of visitation, etc., and potentially whether or not there should be any capping on those numbers, particularly day permits, etc. Now, no decision has yet been made by that group. However, decisions made by the Tiwa Kalula working group in terms of what they might recommend to the state government, either directly or during the review of the Great Sandy Management Plan, may impact upon the number of vehicles and that access the ferry, may also potentially impact upon the way in which services such as permits and ferry tickets are paid for. We also have consideration of the possibility of yearly concession payments, so that rather than residents and property owners on North Shore paying every time they get on the ferry, they just pay an annual fee and don't have to bother with all that palaver. There's a whole lot of factors playing in here. I think we just need a little bit more time, that's all, to discuss with staff and amongst each other all the possibilities that might be in play, so that on Thursday night we can make a more informed decision, that's all. I'm not trying to stymie debate, I'm trying to encourage it.
Could I ask, through the chair, of Councillor Wellington, how you envision all of us at this table being better informed? What process will take place to get us better informed about all this?
Well, I'm going to, if this motion succeeds, I'll be requesting that we have a discussion, just a roundtable discussion with staff before the ordinary meeting, so that we can talk a bit more freely about some of the discussions going on at the working group and etc.
Thank you.
Maybe that could happen at 1:15 on Wednesday.
Councillor Terrace.
In that regard, I've got a question for staff. With this 5-year extension, I mean, has the operator taken into consideration that there may be an impact on numbers going across the ferry over that 5-year, somewhere within that 5-year period?
The report mentions at a couple of places there that there is an existing provision in the lease that we're dealing with that guarantees a floor,
a rise and fall, or a minimum
for standard vehicles.
Okay.
So the current permit regime was in the air at the time that this lease was being considered, and so that provision is in there in relation to the current permit regime. But
so long as it wouldn't mean we've left them hanging in any way, shape or form.
That's right.
Thank you.
Councillor, any other councillors wish to speak to the motion? No. To close, Councillor Wellington.
I just want to make it absolutely clear that whilst I mention some of the issues that the Tiwa Kalula working group are looking at, the group has not made any decisions whatsoever. It may well be that they simply endorse the current status quo, or maybe that they make recommendations different to the status quo. Okay. That's all. Thanks.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Okay, move on now to item 5. Oh, Councillor Parton, back in the room. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Let me go to General Committee.
Reports direct to General Committee. With item 5, the draft events policy for Noosa Shire. We'll wait for Councillor Pardon.
I'm happy to move the draft events policy.
Beat me to it.
Moved by Councillor Jackson,
Seconded.
seconded by Councillor Juricevic. Councillor Jackson was to speak to the motion.
Yes, I will. I would like to compliment Dennis and your team on how well this has been prepared. It's a good overarching policy, not getting too much into the specifics because that has to be done more in guidelines. I'm particularly keen to see that Council will be setting or has the ability to set limits on the number and nature of events in order to control impacts on residents and local businesses. I'm also pleased to see applications that would have the effect of increasing acceptable number of events in any precinct would require council approval, and that new and additional road closures would generally be avoided, particularly in high-use areas where alternate routes are not available. I think these are the key things that have been voiced by our residents, and we want to make sure that we're responding to that. Also, I think that the concept that in principle of giving preference to locally owned businesses and not-for-profit organizations is a good one. That does not mean that they are the only ones that get a chance. Of course, there'll be other opportunities, but it's a good concept as a principle. So I look forward to the community feedback that will come back after this goes out to the public. Thanks.
Any of the councillors to speak to the motion?
Yeah,
just a question. Say it's approved on Thursday night. How long do you envisage the consultation period to be?
I would suggest at least a month. Up to sort of 6 weeks.
Okay.
I think so.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, I did have a question, but I misread the line. That a user-pays approach will be applied to ensure there is no ratepayer subsidy of permit administration for tourist events and events by not-for-profit organisations. The intent there is that the impact of the event organisers will have to pay for the length of time or length of time it takes to administer the permit to apply that. So bigger events will pay a larger fee based on the amount of time it takes to ensure that they're complying with the space that they take up, the road closures and all of those sort of things.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Look, I agree with, I said I'll speak to it now. I agree with the comments by Councillor Jackson, except for one major significant inclusion in there, and that is the adherence to environmental and waste policies of council going forward. I think that's probably another significant achievement of this events policy, and I look forward to seeing the devil in the detail of those. Tourism Noosa, of course, is leading the charge with regard to plastic-free events, and a number of commercial businesses are operating well under plastic-free operations, so it can be incorporated, can be done both at commercial operators level as a business and or events. So I'd be glad to see that fully implemented for all events across the Shire going forward.
Councillor Pardon and Councillor.
I've got a question, that's all.
Oh,
yeah, you go.
Just for the sake of the record, chaps, could you just explain, obviously this gives high-level ideals about our approach to events, but it needs to be supported by greater detail that will be contained in a guideline format. Could you please explain how long it will take and when we might develop those guidelines for events?
It's a good question. I would think in the second half of this year that we should be able to.
So by the end of the calendar year, we expect to have guidelines in place which will carry the details.
Yeah.
But that will also be supported, I understand it, by precinct plans such as the main beach events policy which we have.
And the Noosaville Foreshore
and the Noosaville Foreshore
talks
master
to
plan.
events as well. So.
And there is the intention to potentially develop other precinct plans that would also play into this.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor.
Yeah, with regards to precinct plans and events, Red Hot Summer to Wanton, what a night, what an event. Fantastic. More of this, I
Who's
see.
going to raise a point of order?
So long as he doesn't start singing Johnny Farnham songs again.
It's part of the policy, event policy, etc. And I note that to Wanton, talk about Noosaville, and yeah, the policy was mainly developed for the coastal fringe, if you like, because of various issues we had with our community. And great job from Dennis and Clint up there to put this together. And I agree with the comments of councillors with regards to some of the issues we've had, and we had to do a policy, I believe, because over time, you know, how many events we were going to have, how many road closures, etc., etc. So I just think if we package this up and it comes back from the community, I think the community in general will support this draft going out. I couldn't see there'd be a lot of hassles with it, and it's a terrific outcome. But once again, the hinterland, which is Tewantin's part of the hinterland, and the events that come back out there, I think it's good to have more input from the hinterland with regards to the placemaking, etc. over time. The coast we're crowding out, so I think the Go Bush is going to be good. Beautiful, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stockler.
Yeah, I too want to support the policy. I think it's really important to acknowledge the desired outcomes. Why do we need a policy? And I think what we have heard in the course of this term is some increasing community concerns around the impacts of events. And so the third dot point in desired outcomes is that achieve broad community acceptance with residents' complaints minimised. It makes it clear that the purpose of this policy is trying to address community concerns. But then the dot point above tells you why events are important, because when I look through all those different plans and strategies, they all had a different purpose or a different outcome they sought from events. So there are goals and initiatives within the social strategy, the cultural plan, the sport and recreation plan, and the local economic plan. I think sometimes most of the debate is around the perception that events are just about making money. They're not. They're make it a fun place to live, a healthy place to live, a place where your cultural horizons can be expanded. But for me, I suppose I'm with Councillor Jeruzovic. The number one dot point about setting benchmarks for quality and environmental outcomes. Now, this is something that I was on many years ago. As the last chair under the Noosa Biosphere Limited of the Environment Sector Board, we invested our last lot of money to help Tourism Noosa develop some sustainable event guidelines. And councillors may recall earlier in this term I tried to suggest we take a more proactive stance, and it's really encouraging to see those broad elements included into this document. So what does it include? It talks about we're going to ask events to phase out single-use plastics in the next couple of years. That's a big tick. We're already, I know there's another biosphere down in Victoria who's already being lobbied to bring in our plastic-free Noosa provisions down there, because my cousin spent a year up here and realised how good we do it. But that's really good. But it also, there's another one that I reckon we might get some comment on. And that's saying that fireworks happen at the traditional time of year, Christmas and New Year, and every event doesn't have to have fireworks to be in keeping. We want to look after our dogs, and we want to look after this place as a place where you don't come for glitz and glamour, you come to enjoy what Noosa's got to offer. The other one that's in there and is sustainable transport, and I think this policy will lead the way. And we did have the red hot autumn of their careers, was it, on Saturday?
It's red hot summer.
Summer's been gone.
And they introduced, because of the weather, a whole lot of park and ride. And I think that's really important, that as we go on, I think all major events must count on the fact that, particularly in high-use precincts, that you'll be responsible for providing sustainable transport options. We won't be supplied trying to build great big multi-storey car parks for that once or twice a year when there's a big peak load. So to me, they're really encouraging aspects of this policy, and I look forward to the feedback from the community.
Councillor
Yeah, I want to begin by thanking the staff for their effort in developing this, but also thanking councillors who were very active in their participation in the development of this events policy. It was a great collegiate effort, and I think we're all, at this point in time at least, quite happy with the outcome. I do want to acknowledge that Noosa is a hotspot for events because Noosa carries a certain cachet, and that adds to the status of events, and that's why we get so many applications for events. So therefore it's very important to have a policy so that staff understand what councillors' position is in terms of priorities relating to event approvals. But there's also, as Councillor Stockwell alluded to, been a growing concern in our resident community about the number of events, number of road closures, etc. On various occasions, including to the Tourism Stakeholder Reference Group, I've had the opportunity to actually present the facts, and the facts do not support the arguments, for example, that there is an event every weekend or there are, lots of road closures, etc. In fact, what the facts show is that virtually half of our events happen in the hinterland, not down in the coastal area. However, this is an opportunity at least to get more information out there about the way we approach events. And I notice even on social media, there's been many an argument suggesting that council only supports events because we make a lot of money from it. We do not. We do not make a cent out of events. Fundamentally, we're working our way towards cost recovery on events. We are not there yet. But we also, as this policy notes, we don't want our ratepayers to be subsidising events. So ultimately, we do want to get to that full cost recovery position, but that is not a profit-making position on behalf of council. Nevertheless, I think this is a great start. We've got a lot more work to do, and again, I want to congratulate staff for the effort getting us to this point.
So, Councillor Glasgow.
Yeah, you're right. We don't make any money in these events at all. The application fees are, I won't swear, but little to nothing. But we do have, and you wrote in our, I can't remember the point in there, the social strategy and the goodwill within the community for these events is tremendous, and no one goes to more events in this damn town than me at the moment. So I feel that it's good. We've got the spectrum from A to Z that's really it's got a really vibrant sort of culture through our community about what we are doing, and we have drawn a line in our sand with road closures and so forth, and it's exciting to read that policy, and I think you've done a really good job with it, guys, and I look forward to going to many more fun events through the Shire.
I have a question.
I've got a question.
Joe first and then Brian.
Yeah, sorry, just with regard to a comment made by the Mayor there with regard to sustainable tourism. Half the events are in the hinterland, or half the events with road closures are in the hinterland?
Well, in fact, if you include road closures, well, a bit of both actually. I'll show you the figures later.
I said I do remember the figures, but I thought the half would refer to road closures.
For a number of events in Karoi, in Pomona, and Tewantin, etc. So a lot of the road closures do happen.
I thought that's what the 50% referred to, the number of road closures.
There are also a great many events in the hinterland. They may not be as high profile as the ones on the coast, but there's plenty of them.
Oh yes, I've got a question to anyone who wants to answer it, and it's definitely not because I've got to mention it. In J, it talks about tourism events, corporate events, and events for-profit organisations contribute to broader local environmental outcomes. And it talks about council may seek to establish new initiatives where tourism, corporate and profit events contribute towards local environmental management issues. So in that, is it intended that there may be, because as Councillor Wellington had pointed out, that people come to Noosa because they like the hero shot of our natural environment, that we may be actually looking at conditions that could require some contribution from event holders towards that?
No, that was put into you, Brian, but
yes, through the chair, potentially.
Thank you. Righto.
Actually, I have a little question.
Yes, Ingrid.
It just reminded me, Dennis, that there was a little typo in there, and I'm just wondering how we deal with that.
I changed my mind on that typo, Ingrid.
Yes. So can you remind me?
We were in corporate event definition on page 7.
Yeah. Page 7.
And it includes means an event staged by a business, corporation, or not-for-profit organisation. And we thought perhaps I meant for-profit, but that's actually capturing sort of corporate events put on by not-for-profits, such as junkets by Tourism Noosa and the like. So it is intended that it's not-for-profit in that location.
Ingrid, you wish to close?
I don't think I need to. I welcome everyone's feedback already. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Thank you. We now move on to item 6, which is Boreen Point Campground Management Services Contract Tender. Thank you, Dan. To report direct to the General Committee and the General Committee agenda. Page 8. Questions for staff, councillors?
Yeah, I have a question. Under finance, which is on page 11, it refers to resulting in a 19,000 additional cost to council net operating position. I'm just wondering what that is.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's just as a result of the submission that they've put through. We've actually transferred quite a bit of cost up in the new agreement over to the new provider through this tender. Basically, what that is there is a different cost base that they have through their management structure. There, they'll be having as part of the company, a management team living on site. But it's, I think what we're saying there as well, Councillor Jackson, is that...
Can I just clarify? It says additional cost to council.
Yep.
But is it really a lesser cost? Is that
no. So how it works is at the moment we have a profit of about 100,000 or just over. So it's a reduction on the net profit or result to us. So it takes it down to about 81,000 thereabouts.
Mm-hmm. Because of this change.
Yeah, it's just that their cost base is slightly different, and I mean that you get some variation in that from tender to tender. It just depends on who you get.
How much money they want to get in return?
Yeah, who puts in and.
Oh, I see. So it's not that it's costing us more; it's just that we get less return. That's what
we'll get less return.
Yeah. Okay.
Net cost.
Yeah.
Huh?
The net.
Net.
Yeah.
And the other one I have on page 12 about risks, it talks about business continuity. The management agreement is required to continue business operations without the need of the employment of council staff, brackets, which is not recommended. I'm actually not clear what that means.
What that means, Ingrid, is that we could not go out to management contract for the holiday park. We could actually employ council staff or more than one staff to actually be on site and undertake all of the normal management arrangements on the site. So, however, we're not recommending that that's the approach we take. We continue with the outsourcing of the management.
Fine. Yeah, I didn't quite understand that sentence. Yeah, thank you. I have another one. It's proposed, page 12, opportunities, it's proposed the council review the operating model of the business activity within the next 3 years. Proposed review would identify the most efficient management agreement contract delivery model to drive service delivery improvements for patrons in addition to maximizing revenue opportunities for council. I'm wondering why this review of operating model wasn't done before the tender.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
I can answer that one. This, in terms of the revenue diversification project, which has been a little bit stalled, which is with me, due to the fact we've had other emerging issues, i.e. TAFE and the like, that have come onto my plate, and short-term accommodation studies and so on. As part of that diversification project, I want to look at the total management model of the holiday parks. So do we continue as is? Do we potentially look at a full outsource model? So we ask the market, potentially, do we bundle up all of the holiday parks and we go out to the larger operators and say, how much will you potentially pay council to take it off our hand? Well, in terms of
lease,
an fully outsourced lease arrangement, where currently it's a bit of a hybrid model where we lease out the management rights, but we still receive the revenue from fees. We still pay a lot of the operating costs. Where there are different models where you can the risk transfers to the commercial market, and they just pay us effectively to lease the land, and then they determine the revenues and the pricing in a fully commercial market. So that's something I want to explore, but that's going to take time, because you need to do a lot of modelling. Potentially for the whole package, and even as we know, there's the potential to explore the John's Landing site and package that in as well. So that's why I didn't want to look at that now, because I just haven't had time. So.
Okay. Just explain how we're lining up all the tents as well. Time to get.
Yes, and the other one with the management agreements, we're hoping to align those so they all end around the same time, so we can do that further analysis.
Thank you.
Councillor Jurisovic and Councillor Glasgow.
Yeah, I know the incumbent managers didn't reapply for tender here. Were there any issues there with regard to?
No, there wasn't. They're just
moving on.
They're winding down.
That's right. Just wanted to clarify that. And the new contract managers have a number of other existing operations. Can you tell me where else they? What other parks they manage?
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. They have a park down in the Moreton Bay Regional Council, and they also have one up in the Cassowary Coast.
So they're Queensland-based entity, and okay, they just don't have.
I think the North Queensland one's Mission Beach, I think.
Okay, and Moreton's relatively closer. So
yeah.
So it's they're based in Southeast Queensland, or I said with two operations. Where are they based?
Yeah, I think they're Brisbane based. Okay. Joe, I'd have to take that on notice, but I'm quite sure they're Brisbane based.
Okay, just wanted to check how local they were. Thank you.
Yeah, mine was more on to Michael about Ingrid's point, and just about how we're becoming quite a pioneering of parks at the moment. Are we ever getting anything kind of streamlined affecting its cost savings? You know, we've got Boreen Point, we've got North Shore, we've got possibly John's Landing. You know, we don't know what's going on in the future. There's an conversation about streamlining these and working together. If we had the three, one would be a lot more efficient, wouldn't it?
Yeah, potentially that's what we're going to look at as part of the revenue project. We'll look at what operating models can we potentially employ to get those efficiencies and those savings, and that potentially extra revenue, which offsets the general rate, of course. So that's that all needs to be looked at. But
and this is not locking us into anything. We can sort of diversify a bit in the future with that, working with all 3 or 4 of the parks together.
Well, essentially, we can. I mean, we talked about the end dates and whatever. Generally, we've operated these holiday parks with separate managers in there. What we're saying is that in the future, there might be opportunities to look at a management team to look at all, but there may be opportunities to have separable portions where if you had a very good submission from an individual company, we're just not prepared to write any of that off at this point. We're just opening it up. But I think, as Michael said before, this process is all about streamlining and providing a good quality service and maximising returns back to the ratepayer.
That's it, thanks. Sorry, Ron.
I was going to move it.
I had a question around the $19,000 additional net cost for council as well. We also mentioned that in return, council gets a more professional management structure out there, which potentially more professional marketing, which means eventually more greater occupancy rate, greater returns to council, combined with less staff time administrating.
That's right.
How soon do you expect council to see the returns for that drop in revenue, and is it linked to any KPIs?
Well, it's prefaced on a couple of things. One is the fact that talk about that there's good opportunities for building the revenue base, the occupancy. So the more they do that, the more that everyone's a winner. So for us as well, we do a monthly or 2 monthly meeting, and that's come into this contract as well. So what happens with that is that the park managers provide a report on all the issues that's out of the booking system and whatever else, and a whole range of other issues. So we're able to go over and keep a fairly close track on that, working with the managers to improve performance. We already do that with Noosa River Holiday Park. So what's happening here is we're transitioning more into a contract management style of management as opposed to being in the business. So as Michael said before, it's kind of a hybrid at the moment. We've transferred operational costs over, such as fire safety, electrical, switchboard checking and all of those things.
So that will cost the council more initially?
No, that cost is going over. So I would expect to see some return on this fairly much straight away, because we're not getting involved in the backroom purchase orders and all of the backroom management.
So the bottom line affects us adversely, $19,000 initially, but you expect in the long run to be to ratepayers' advantage.
Hopefully shorter than the long run, but
first year.
I would hope we'd see some improvement.
Sorry, can I,
Yes, Joe.
one more question. Just, Kyle, if you can bring up page 13 of the. It's a minor point. Just on the table that's been presented, I noticed that 1-8 Proprietary Limited, their score by weighting hasn't. They've only got score, not score by weighting in that table. Just a minor point. Is that something missing in the in that element of the report? There's a column missing.
65.
Or appears to be a column missing. Is that correct?
Joe,
They represent 100.
yeah, I don't believe there is. I can check it for you, but
That's why I just wondered why there's a score by weighting for everybody else and there isn't one for them. There's a score only. I see what you're saying, it being 100.
Yeah.
But still the 87.5 should be taken as a 15% of that overall. So you're saying they're not at 15% though. For that first 87.5, they'd have to be at 100 to get 15%, wouldn't they? To get a score of 15.
Yeah.
So 87.5 isn't 100, Dennis.
Yeah.
I think what column's been cut off. By the way.
Column's been cut off in there. Could we just get a revised, fully
we can get one
incorporated table for the ordinary meeting, please?
Councillor Stockwell.
Yeah, I'm happy to move them for recommendation.
Second. Move Councillor Stockwell, second Councillor Pardon.
I do so because this particular campground is my favourite. I go there 2, 3, sometimes more times a year.
Playing favourites now.
And I think it's important that we do move ahead, but I also think it's important that we, as in the report, each of our campgrounds do have a different character. And this one plays a role just as much for tourists as it does for our locals who can go up there and do a spot of sailing and fishing. And so it's good that we're moving ahead and that these people will have experience. I'd also like to take the opportunity because I've seen, I think, 4 or 5 sets of managers go through that park. And I'd like to put on record to thank the incumbents because they're personable, they're always willing to help. They are, of the ones we've had there, they're as good as any have been, and I know they're looking forward to moving into a new house they built in Taunton just before they got the contract and enjoying life rather than 7 days a week in the caravan park. So, yep, that's all I've got to say.
Councillor Park.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, in supporting the report before us, or the motion before us now, I thank staff for their work, obviously, and with regards to these campgrounds, etc., and the business, I guess, I guess I'm always big on promoting these type of businesses. I've always said as they're shutting them down south, and Noosa should look at every opportunity to be opening them up, and that's because that $900,000 that we get for our campgrounds combined net is about 1 3/4% rate rise that we'd have to put on to cover that revenue if we didn't have our campgrounds and we did these businesses to help our ratepayers. So any improvements we can do, and I know we'd be looking at reviews, costs, etc. Are our costs similar, I guess, to other campgrounds in reviews going forward, and always looking at maximising our shot. And I was pleased to hear staff, and it doesn't surprise me, Michael with his business hat on, and Clint, looking at the big picture, whether we combine them and go out there. And we'd only do that if there's, obviously, if there's more return on investment. Otherwise, why would you? So I'll look forward to the future and what they might bring back over time. And look, I understand if you look at the North Shore ground and some of I suppose the hold-ups we've had with regards to the redevelopment, etc. If we look at the big picture, and Michael said it quite clearly with regards to TAFEs and various issues that come to staff, it's hard to continue to keep doing all the micro things and the macro things going forward. So I think they've done a really good job given left field and other demands that have come upon them. So I understand in the time and sense, if they get this 3 years up and gives them time to have a look at the big picture as well. So it's good. Thank you.
Joe.
Yeah, I'll start with a question. These the operators of this were the ones that also assisted us with the Karoy RV park and the first operators up there, were they?
From memory, yes.
Sorry,
yeah.
the incumbents.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, they
Yeah.
are. Yes, they
Yeah.
are.
So I joined Councillor Stockwell in thanking these guys. In some ways, I'm disappointed. They have got a great reputation. Again, they did assist us with establishing the Karoy RV park and getting that underway, and stepped in when we were challenged by getting operators for up there. So I wish them all the best with their future endeavours, and look forward to seeing the new operators undertake whatever changes they're going to implement. But the significance of this park shouldn't be lost. Boreen Point is a significant tourist operation and a significant tourist destination for, as many of us are learning with some of the challenges of the planning scheme going forward and being reminded by Boreen Point residents. But I said I wish the new operators well.
Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Wish to close, Brian? Put the motion. Those in favour? Against, motion's carried. Thank you. We now move to item 7, which is the commercial high-use permit application for Ride Green Proprietary Limited, the Neon Ride Scooters. Page 14. General Committee, a report direct to General Committee. Councillors, question. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. Did Neon Ride make any representation in Noosa Council before running their two-day trial?
Glasgow's going to the toilet. Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry, I'll repeat that. Yeah. Did Neon Ride make any representation in Noosa Council for any permit before running what they referred to as a two-day trial?
Through you, Mr. Chair, they may have had discussions with council officers, certainly not with me, about operating in the Shire, but they certainly didn't have a permit.
Did they operate from council controlled land during that two-day trial?
Yes, they did.
Okay. The second question I have relates to, just for the sake of those who may be watching this recording, in terms of creating a local law to accommodate scooters, for example, if we needed to establish zones, the creation of a local law is not a simple matter. It involves a statutory process which includes community consultation. Can you explain how long it normally takes to go through that process of creating new local laws, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Wellington, I have to take that on notice because that would go through our local laws area.
I could give you an estimate, minimum 6 months.
Minimum 6 months to create a new local
law. Putting it through a council meeting, state interest check, public advertising, yeah, minimum 6 months.
And in terms of the permit fees, you've said in the report that councils are considering different permit fee options. It's been reported that Brisbane is imposing $5,000 permit fee for 3 months on each operator, plus $570 per scooter per year. Can you confirm that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I did see that. I haven't confirmed that with Brisbane City Council, but I did see that article on that.
And am I correct in what I've read in the press, that, as far as you're aware, that they have a tender process looking for at least 2 companies to operate scooter hire services in the city, but there has been considerable criticism of that tender process?
I'm aware that the tender process is underway, it's live. I'm not aware of criticism about the process, but I certainly have spoken to the officers down there to confirm that it's underway.
Just to follow on from that, my understanding is that other scooter hire services are criticising the process because they feel excluded from it. But anyway, okay, thanks.
Yeah, I have a question. I also have a question. On page 16, there's a reference to council having the ability to establish zones where shared mobility devices are excluded, so an exclusion zone. This would have to be amending a subordinate local law. And I'm just wondering if that kind of exclusion zone were put in place, would that also apply then to privately owned scooters and through scooters hired from like resorts and other businesses?
Through Mr. Chair, my understanding is that would be the case. It would be for the actual device to prevent it from traversing areas.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jurisovic.
Do we currently have any other commercial permit out there that allows for activity across the Shire as opposed to just in one locality? I.e. surf school is at Main Beach sort of activity with regard to operation on public land?
As far as I'm aware, no. As far as I'm aware, they're all fixed.
Yeah, they're all fixed within
their fixed locations.
Fixed within their locations. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. Thank you.
Councillor Glasgow and Councillor Jackson.
A little bit question for Brett, and this to me, why wasn't it ever transport driven? Come from them? It's just about land use, isn't it?
I can answer.
Yeah.
I can answer that.
You go.
Through Mr. Chair. Yeah. Look. It's because it came to us as a permitting issue. The transport are taking the lead. They're having discussions. I've attached attachment 2 there. They're having discussions currently with the Department of Transport on main roads about shared mobility devices and electric scooters as a segment. So yes, they are taking the lead. It just happens with this one that it came across as a permit application, but what we're saying in here is that council continues those discussions and that transport continue to take the lead.
Councillor Joe.
One question: if this was set up as a commercial operation on private land, i.e., out of say one of the resorts or out of numerous resorts and all the rest of it, would these scooters be permitted to park in council bike parking areas?
Through Mr. Chair, look, that would be. That's a difficult one to answer. What this report's about is the permitting. So the private use and where they operate from as a back to base model is quite different to what we're talking about here in terms of permitting, council permitting an activity to occur.
I suppose local laws will be the people I ask as to what is permitted to park in each of the relevant, like what's considered a bicycle and what people, because typically with these type of devices, they tend to park at the point of destination and be left outside. Is that, as I understand it?
That's right. So you're correct. You're getting into kind of local law territory there, and I would prefer not to dip my toe into that.
Probably to answer your question, certainly the scooters that originate from a private property, like that, and it's very similar to the private bike companies that operate out of resorts.
No different from personal use.
Right. Or e-bikes or bikes that people rent from their accommodation provider. They can come out and use those and tie them up to the bike rack if they want to. I just don't know how scooters go with bike racks.
Well, I'm just trying to think of where, from a practical perspective, they may be able to be corralled, if you like, at their point of destination. But I guess, like bikes, they would have to find a safe. It'd be up to the person riding it to find a safe position to leave the device in.
If you use that analogy of bikes, they go back to where they came from when they're finished.
Yes. But that's the return. That's the return aspect. But a journey may be two-way. It may go to a destination for a period and then be taken back. But I guess the way that these are set up in the public realm is that because it's a use per, a fee per time period or per kilometre or whatever, it tends to get left at a destination. Once complete.
Yeah, I think the other point to think about as well is the private model is quite different in that you're probably not going to get people leaving them on the footpath, given that they're responsible for their return.
That's the difference in the two.
It's quite a
difference in the two models.
Yeah.
Councillor Glasgow.
Well, the whole idea about the scooter share is having the share element, which is where you go and you share it and someone else rides it back. So that's hence why it's share. But just a bit of a process question. This being a high use permit application, this is in no way determining a yes or a no to the actual service down the line, is it? Because it has, over the weekend I have noticed, and I was involved in, there was a couple of scooters, electric scooters left in and around the classic Malibu store, the Hastings Street, in and around these kind of private pieces of land around town. But if you know they put runs on the board with this, let's just say call it a trial of their private.
No.
There's no reason why they can't come back to us in time for another permit to come through and say, look, we've rolled out a private use permit. That was being quite used. I don't know if anyone noticed it, but they've been quite used in and around that flat mobility area of Noosaville, Hastings Street, Yacht Club kind of area, and they were out and about quite well. So there's no reason why that couldn't work as a trial, and in the future,
well, I think
get some runs on the boards and come to you again with.
Yeah, look, through you, Mr. Chair, I think there's a couple of issues here. One is that we're talking about private uptake. We expect there will be private uptake, and part of that is operating from resorts and people from all demographic age groups jumping on a scooter as they would do with a bike or skateboard or anything else. What we're saying here is though that council permitting the activity won't happen yet until the transport team undertake their discussions with DTMR. Yeah, we are monitoring other Brisbane City Council as other councils are, and things like that. We take a proper evidence-based approach to it before we even consider it. So, I mean, look, to be clear, down the track, they may be permitted, but it's not somewhere where we're at the moment. And I think we cover off in the options analysis. There's a couple of different options there, and the risks and opportunities of.
And given how stringent or how the great value that this community places on its public spaces, open public spaces, and the rigour and thought that's put around giving public space over to any sort of commercial activity as demonstrated on Noosa Main Beach. If down the track this council wanted to consider giving some public space, community land over to a commercial activity such as scooter hire, will that have to go to a tender process for?
Yes, it would.
For competitors in the same field?
Yeah, I think
rather than just award it
to be open and transparent. Absolutely. Yeah.
Councillor Wilkie, I'd like to move the motion, but with some extra wording.
Of course.
Kylie, at the end of B, if you could please add, at the end of, no, I can do it now, and community consultation carried out before any final approval of the strategy by council. So, yeah.
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
What strategy?
It refers to an appropriate evidence-based management strategy has been developed in response to manage those issues.
That's what I was just trying to read to find out where the strategy, reading the rest of it, to find out where the strategy was.
So do we want to call it the management strategy by council? Just to be clear.
Yeah, okay, so follows on.
It refers to management strategy.
Sorry.
I'm happy to second that.
Okay. Councillor,
you want to talk to the management strategy?
No,
Clint,
there's no
what do you mean by management strategy?
Geez, there's a good question.
Something that transport will have to. No. Well, look. I think what that's fine with me. The management strategy, evidence base, is really trying to capture all of that Councillor Jackson's talking to there. We're talking to the community because it's not one of those uses that you just introduce without having done so. That's fine.
Can I ask, might it be better that we refer to it as a management approach? Strategy suggests a formal document, whereas approach is a little looser. Would that work for you better, and would it work for the move?
I think you're going to have a document that sets that out. I think it's going to be a strategy, a formal document that you're going to need in place to guide decision making in the future.
Okay.
One would think.
Can I add on in one of our sort of hierarchy of nomenclature, strategy tends to be of a higher order than this. This would be more a plan, wouldn't it? In terms of we tend to keep our strategies quite high.
Issues paper.
Issues paper.
Well, no, an issues paper isn't a policy. it needs to have a policy element.
One would think that and I'll address this to the CEO, I guess. One would think that a strategy for use on public land would come out of the parameters of a tender.
No. Traffic and transport.
The tender would come out of a strategy.
No, potentially. Look, the question of strategy plan probably does a lot more turn on that today. It's really going to have a document that's going to say how we're going to manage these things in the future.
Yeah.
And what the
it's a small S.
Can I just check? I'm still not happy with strategy, so just bear with me for a second. A management approach can include a strategy. It can include a policy. It can include anything. It includes. It is more encompassing, if you like. So I'm still
not necessarily, unfortunately, because it could be the opposite.
You know, can I ask a question? Was the word management strategy deliberately chosen there?
Well, Councillor, it's about being strategic. Look, I think
generally from a land tenure perspective, the management strategies are the terminology that's used by the state in terms of those uses of public land. So I think that's where.
Could I add another point too? That I guess what we're talking about here is a guiding document to inform, because the permit decisions happen downstream of a strategy or a policy or whatever else. So if council decides through its that it wants to pursue this, then we would take that on board to get into that permitting scenario. So we wouldn't.
That's different. That's later. Strategy is higher up.
Yeah.
Well, we have to start higher up before we move down.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. Okay.
One would suggest it could become could be an element of the transport strategy going forward.
It may well,
as opposed to a separate strategy.
That's what I thought.
That's how I would see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Whatever document is developed, do you foresee any problem with it going out for public comment?
No.
Okay, great. Councillor Jackson, you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, I do. I'd like to say I'm in favour of option 2 because it seeks to develop a strategy on the basis of evidence and risk assessment. And I hope that would give opportunity to consider the pros and cons of shared devices, mobility devices, and also the viability of using it for transport, and particularly to look at exclusion zones. I also support refusing the current requests and future requests for the time being. Noosa's motto is different by nature, and our residents are often calling for minimizing signage clutter, minimizing big events, and a peaceful existence free of helicopters and low-lying airplanes. The council went to a lot of trouble. The council went to a lot of trouble to get community feedback on the Noosaville Foreshore Land Use Master Plan, with over 90% of survey respondents in favor of the foreshore remaining a peaceful, relaxing, public open space for people to enjoy the river. I think this tells us quite a bit about what our community values. And unlike electric bicycles, which go on the road with other vehicles, these electric scooters go on the footpath where people are walking. When I was in Brisbane recently, walking along the river there, these scooters were zooming around everywhere, they are left everywhere, and that is pretty cluttered looking. We have an aging population. Soon we'll almost have 1/3 people over 65. And as people get older, their agility is not all that good for dodging electric scooters. So while scooters are no doubt fun to ride and use, I believe that as electric scooters may have a high impact on the amenity and well-being of residents and visitors. For this reason, it's very important that not only do we develop a strategy based on research and facts, but also that we go to public consultation to gain feedback from our community.
Just a question following on from Councillor Jackson's well-made comments there. Given the speeds that the scooters travel at, is it likely that it will have the potential to have a high impact directly on residents?
I'd say it could happen.
Councillor Wellington?
Yeah, interestingly, the calls for scooters in Noosa that I'm receiving are mostly coming from ride operators, not from residents. I've received, I just looked, 8 emails that were a product of an online petition that Neon Ride in particular set up, and thus I think all councillors may have received those emails when people signed up to the petition.
Standard letter?
Yeah, which is just a form letter, and I'm not sure that any of those signatories actually were residents of Noosa, because one can't tell. But apart from that, I've had no requests directly from residents for Noosa to establish these scooters, but I've had an awful lot of approaches from operators, not just Neon Ride and Lime, but other operators as well. In fact, I'm getting one a week these days. So obviously Noosa has that cachet, and it might be beneficial to a business to be able to establish their business here, even if it's not profit making. It still provides them with some degree of cachet in terms of their business operations to be able to say they operate in Noosa, and there are indeed businesses currently operating in Noosa for that reason. Look, the expert advice that Noosa had received, and I think all councillors were present at a workshop not long ago on to find out more about e-scooters, was that the e-scooters currently on the market would not be able to achieve the gradient to go up Noosa Drive from Hastings Street to Noosa Junction. So there are some issues in terms of what is a major route that one would expect that people would want to ride between Noosa Junction and Hastings Street if these machines can't actually traverse it. Noosa is quite different to the Brisbane CBD in terms of demographic and population density, and so it's not a simple matter that the sort of system that can operate in a big city can necessarily operate in a regional low density area like Noosa. And I would like to point out that there is at least one long-standing local business who has at least verbally said they are prepared to offer a service in Noosa that meets Noosa Council's needs and will be organised to meet Noosa Council's needs, rather than simply rolling out a generic type hire service as Lime and Neon are inclined to do, where they're simply left, as has been pointed out, willy-nilly to be picked up by whoever. This indeed long-standing local business person has suggested that they would be willing to do it from certain bases in the Shire, so that the bikes would have to be returned to those bases. So that's something we can pursue in the interim. But I was in Brisbane 2 weeks ago, and I did my own little survey. In fact, along the foreshore of the river there of bike riders, 70%, I counted over 100 riders, 70% did not wear helmets. Only 30% were riding helmets. And of the bikes, the scooters I should say, that were left lying around, about half of them had helmets attached and half didn't. So there's a big lag between the laws, the legislation and the behaviour change required to accommodate this, what is really a disruptive service, like many other new age disruptive services, that is seeking to exploit a lack of legislation. There are dangers. I quote from a Queensland Ambulance Service paramedic, Madeline Shield, who says that crews are increasingly being called to scooter incidents. It's a regular occurrence. They go to electric scooter crashes or people coming off those scooters, and there's lists of all sorts of horrid results, particularly people not wearing helmets and ending up with serious brain injuries. The issues around public liability and insurance risk are something we absolutely have to get our head around before we head down this path. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that we shouldn't be considering scooter operations in Noosa, but as Councillor Jackson has really pointed out, if we do go down this path, we have to do it in our own fashion that suits the Noosa look and feel and suits our residents. So we do need to take our time over this. There is no rush, and I'm certainly not getting pressure from residents that we need to leap on board these electric scooters right away.
Thank you, Councillor Warrington. Councillor Parton, Councillor Stockler.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I like the Mayor's Noosa, cachet, that attractive, iconic place where we all set up. But the good thing about that, I suppose, well, it's mainly about the cash. I don't know the cash. It's the cash and the cash. But I don't have a problem with people chasing cash, and I really don't have a problem with young entrepreneurs with flair coming to Noosa and I guess sitting on that Noosa name, brand, etc. In fact, I applaud them because they're smart and that's why they're out there. It's interesting, at the meeting we've had recently with regards to the scooter issue, so private enterprise, apparently we can buy them and we get them across to China for about $300. And so the TMR said they're legal, so we're going to, obviously, I've seen one burning around, that's all I've seen, but I don't hang down the bottom where young Jess does a lot, sees a lot more. Hangs around the bottom end of the Shire. I've got to finish that stuff.
I haven't noticed.
Well, I wouldn't have bothered, but for the mayor's comment, I'll be clear.
Stand up, Jess.
I'll be clear. I'll get into trouble with calling Hastings Street.
Decorum.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Yeah, that the Hastings Street end of the Shire, I'll say, where the movers and shakers hang out. But in Tewantin, I have spotted one. It was interesting the pace it actually went. It was quite phenomenal, and they say they do about 27k. And as was pointed out, I think by Councillor Jackson, our demographic here, and whilst I at nearly 70 step very lively and can dodge and weave still, there's many of our population around that age that cannot move that quick. With a vehicle on a footpath or even not on a footpath, travelling at high speed, I can see some problems, and I guess I'm not surprised there's been some accidents. And so whilst I applaud people for trying to front run things, lead if you like, and look at various ways in electronic transport on public land, no, and I've suggested quite openly to some people, if you want to go down these type of paths, there's commercial operations you can partner with, etc., and commercial sites right across this Shire in industrial states, etc. But it's not for me to point these things out. It's for the people, the clever people, to work it out for themselves. But having said that, I really don't know long term how a community like us is going to deal with high-speed vehicles on footpaths and that. And I guess it comes back to our strategy of looking at the big picture of our traffic and transport strategy, but also going forward in the upcoming budget with regards to getting our pathways off-road, etc., those type of pathways and linkages across our Shire, so that as the modern world kicks along here, that we have these particular paths that can carry these vehicles and sort of try and separate, if you like, between people walking, recreating, and people who are going fairly fast on electric vehicles, whatever form they are. But I support this.
Councillor Stockler.
Oh yeah, so I think what we're dealing with here is an application for a high-use commercial activity within our parkland, and as Councillor Jackson pointed out, that issue was well and truly ventilated in the Noosa Foreshore Management Plan, and we got very clear feedback that our population values its parkland for the purpose it was designed for, and this doesn't fit. However, I'm also aware how adroitly staff pointed out in the risk session that this nascent technology, that we could be perceived to be prevaricating in our response.
You're trying to outdo the mayor in big words, aren't you?
I'm just quoting from the report.
Okay.
And I'm not going to beat around the bush. I don't think we are prevaricating. I think what we're doing is taking a sensible approach. But then there was the other, we might be seen to be a killjoy. I'm not allowing something. It won't be long before we have our first fatal accident, is what we see coming out of Brisbane, if this industry isn't regulated appropriately. So we're not being a killjoy. The last one's the most important risk that we should address, and that is that council's actions may be interpreted, or they suggest will be interpreted, as not supporting alternative transport options and not doing enough to dissuade reliance on the private car. Now, councillors, I wouldn't be so glib to say by 2030 50% of scooters will be electric. Sorry, but what I would say is by 2025, I would be disappointed if this council hasn't got a two-way E-lanes running between the Noosa Yacht and Rowing Club to the Noosa Heads Lifesaving Club. That's the real challenge for this council. If we're going to dissuade cars, we need to create the routes and the network to support the alternative transports, which will be small scale, which will be electric, and which should be divorced from people strolling along the river. And I think that is a challenge. Perhaps not for this term of council, but definitely for the next.
Councillor Joe, thank you, Councillor Stockwell.
Methinks Councillor Stockwell might be a bit short on substance with regards to his electric scooter comment there. Look, there are many challenges of this, and one does wonder why the commercial use of community land is the first locality that this sort of disruptive technology has drawn itself to, not trying to establish with commercial partners and commercial operators, and using networks that already exist to function from, provide recharging stations and the like. I mean, I'm hearing that that these devices are being picked up by a network of people that are actually driving to pick up the scooter, to take it home, to charge it, to then bring it back and make it feasible to operate again. So I mean, there's challenges going forward in the operating plans, but there's nothing to stop these type of devices being used from commercial land. There's no stop private devices. So the challenges with regard to speeds, helmets, and all of that could potentially arise without us approving this. But like Councillor Wellington, I witnessed a couple of these while in Brisbane recently, and whilst they took off quite nicely and sedately, and all seemed quite fair and reasonable, one had a helmet, the other one didn't. So there's no way of ensuring even that the riders that get on these devices are undertaking good, safe practices to ensure their own personal safety. I support the staff recommendation here. I don't think a commercial high use permit is necessarily the appropriate way to start with something like this. I mean, it's disruptive technology trying to take a foothold on something that is probably seen as a cheap source of sourcing an outlet to operate from, as opposed to establishing their own commercial outlet, such as our cycle riders, our cycle hirers do, or to look at the opportunities. And I think those opportunities really do exist, particularly if you went with, we're a member of Tourism Noosa and could partner with every one of the accommodation providers in Noosa through that sort of a networking arrangement. I mean, that would give you access to literally hundreds of outlets that people are already established at, as opposed to, I can see the appeal of, oh look, the scooter's there, I can grab it while I'm here and not have to go anywhere to do it. But the incidents of accidents that we're hearing, the speeds that are being achieved, and all of that, and the challenges that other councils have faced with this disruptive technology landing on their doorstep unannounced, gives me credence to think that the approach here is the most prudent. And anyway, to give one operator preference over another without going to a full and open tender process is not one I would support anyway.
Councillor Jess.
Oh, I can see where this conversation's going. Really forthcoming councils here. Look, I'd really hope for our planning scheme motto is we are different by nature, and I do very much agree with, there has been a lot of bad publicity around coming from the scooters and what's going on in the future and what's happening currently with them. A high use permit right now, I agree, is not the best way to get this off the ground at the moment. I understand that they've had a location in. I really do believe this needs to be driven from the transport strategy. If they did their due diligence and did all their research and getting this coming from their side of the organisation, it would probably fly a little bit more. But we are different by nature, and we're looking at a lot of adversities here at the moment, but we can make this work. They're working at the moment with the private trials they run on a weekend. People are on and off them. Every 2 or 3 people on the scooters, one car off the road. We're having thousands of cars going up and down our streets every weekend. So it's a thought to be thought about for the future. Can it work in Noosa? Because we are different by nature, and maybe it might work in Councillor Stockwell. I don't know where he's going to get the money for this great big road, the yacht club to Hastings Street, but why not?
New roads.
you know, we might see them in years to come. So I really support this, what's happening at the moment, their trial, what they're doing in their pilot. I think it's innovative, and hopefully they come out with some good statistics, and in whatever years to come or months to come, we can tackle this again. But I do support the fact that this can't happen on a high use permit right at this minute. But I don't obviously support the fact that we cannot not look at them, because I think we're different by nature, and this is something that can happen in the future. We just have to keep our minds and ears open, and just kind of be accepting that we could have these happening in the future, and would want to look at that right now. So that's me.
Well, look, as with every other item on this agenda today, I think the councillors have absolutely nailed their decisions and heading in the right direction. Made very good, eloquent arguments. Thank you, staff, for a very good report. All the risks clearly identified, all the legal issues clearly identified. Taking a precautionary approach is the wise one in terms of giving over public land to a commercial activity, and also given the amount of interest from a variety of private commercial scooter operators in using Noosa's public land. I think issuing a commercial permit to one at this stage would be very unwise, notwithstanding the premium we place on public open space. As has already been said, this company is free to operate from within existing commercial leases. The back to base model, which requires the scooters to return back to the base of the operation at the end of their hire period, rather than leaving them over public land, is the wise one. And if we do wish to consider having electric scooters on public land, a full investigation is merited. Of course, I support the motion that's before us.
Can we scoot through to the
please.
And you thought my allusion to Bob Bill Shorten was bad.
Councillor Jackson, wish to close?
No.
Okay. We'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against, the motion is carried.
Thanks, Clint.
Thank you, Clint.
Thank you. Thanks, Clint.
Thank you. Next up, we have the Budget Review 3 for the 2018 financial year. Welcome, Trent Gruff. Page 31.
I've got a lot
of the General Committee agenda. And we did miss you on Friday, Brian. Brian, you might. Okay, any questions for Trent, councillors?
Yeah, just Mr. Chair, on page 39, with regards to, in the light of this council, I don't even want to say the coffin lowering device, because I know what that's going to do here.
Is it electric?
Where is that?
solar powered?
There was a yes, it was an emergent works as well, and anyway, but I couldn't see that led to a safety. We bought a safety device to go around so people didn't fall in. Is it somewhere else?
No,
sorry, I mucked it up.
The safety device was purchased last year, but they actually had problems trying to get the coffin over the safety device.
Oh, that's right.
So they need
so
the lowering
this come
device.
later.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm getting mixed up. Okay, thanks, mate.
I thought it was preparation for next year's election.
Yes.
Oh,
question?
Yeah. Just I believe that in our and all the figures and tables and stuff we've got in there, we've basically got enough money coming in through our managers to do whatever they want. Is that what you're kind of getting into these days?
Not whatever.
That's an answer.
Much
That was a no.
We're in a good space for this I don't know what you call definition of having managers performing to the way we want to perform. We're feeling financially stable through the numbers that we've got here.
This financial year to date, we've found sufficient savings and additional revenue to cover all the emergent needs that have come up to fund those additional operating activities. And still maintain the service.
That's a yes.
We can never do everything.
You never have enough money to do everything.
Councillor Jones.
I might argue that statement, but when I see capital works for parks and playgrounds being adjusted in BR3 down 910,000 from an initial budget of 1.735 to greater than half the budget reduction, initial budget reduction, and pathways and boardwalks, when talking about transport strategy, reduced by $750,000. My question would be, what aren't we doing? Why are we, what's not happening in parks and playgrounds and pathways and boardwalks?
The playground timing of the playground pretty much accounts for all of that.
Is that all associated with
yeah.
Roy Playground?
Yep.
Yeah, it's going over a couple of years.
One project.
And on that one, Joe, we're still waiting to hear back. We've made an application for grant funding from the state, but we still haven't heard that back. Once we get the results of that, we'll put a report to council.
The boardwalks was actually cost savings, wasn't it, on the budget?
Yep. Yeah, under budget.
400.
I don't think I saw that come up.
Councillor, on page 33 there's a capital table where we've broken up the types of movement of the capital works. So you'll see it's a mix of emergent works, there's some savings, some increases, but there is a mix of delaying out the 1920 and bringing forward from...
yeah, 910,000 later 1920, but that's so it is specifically just the Corroy Playground project there with regard to that. So that was a concern to see such a large value, to see half the budget disappear, that's all. And to clarify what it was for, pathways and boardwalks, so that $180,000. So considering we've had savings with regard to the main boardwalk project, where else are we losing on pathways and boardwalks? Is that just more savings there, or is that actually a reduction in services?
There's a couple of items in the pathways and boardwalks. There's obviously savings for both Main Beach and Park Road boardwalks, which takes us nearly to 600,000. As well as that, there's timing of works pushing out to the 1920 year. So I think you'll find that
180k being timing issues.
That's right. So it's timing issue. I think mainly those bridge and beach boardwalk works to align with the toilet blocks.
Oh, then we don't have to worry
about
about
going
in there. I've got it right. Thank you.
Further questions? Someone care to move the...
I'll move.
Move Councillor Jackson, second Councillor Glasgow. Are you to speak to it, Councillor Jackson?
I'll just briefly say that I would really like to compliment and thank Trent and Michael for extremely informative and detailed information here, with flowing through from the submissions, the recommendations, and then attachments that show the actual impact on the budgets into the future. So I think this is a very detailed and very open, informative document that's available to the public as well as to councillors, and that's good. Thank you.
Councillor Stockler.
Yeah, I think it's a good review. I think it's a positive one. The one that I thought was most positive, and I think it'll be something we can look at going into next year, was we had quite a difficult task in the waste management budget this year when all the increased costs for recycling were factored in, and trying to keep down the actual waste levies to our ratepayers. But in this one, we note that the sales of recovered plastic bottles from the introduction of the container refund scheme is looking at revenue being budgeted of $180,000. I'll look forward to spending that next year.
Any other councillors wish to comment?
No comment. Leave my container deposits alone.
Councillor Jackson wish to close? Okay, all in favour? Against? Motion carried. Moving to the final item. The financial... I beg your pardon. The final item in open session, financial report, March 2019. Questions for Trent and Michael?
I'll move it. I've got one for the CEO though.
Okay, it's moved. Councillor Glasgow. You can still ask questions as we go on.
I'll second it. I've got a couple of questions.
Questions, Joe?
The environmental health costs for vector control, 48k below year-to-date budget. I'm assuming that's because of all the dry weather and we haven't had to actually make all those mozzie sprays over a period of time. And I'm also assuming that as a result of that, we'll, if that's correct, that we'll be soon catching up with that with all the recent wet weather. with a different
I hope so, because I would have been to one.
Last Friday.
And just to add, Mr. Chair, there was one of the reasons why we missed a helicopter drop on the North Shore due to Cyclone Omar coming down the coast. So you can't fly and then proceed by your GIS system or GPS system and drop your tablets accurately with 100-kilometre-hour winds blowing. So they missed an opportunity there, which caused an outbreak of mosquitoes, and they last about 3 weeks, those guys, those little black ones. So this caused a lot of angst in the community, but Omar sort of done us in there.
The chopper was up a couple of weeks ago, which
yes,
was after the end of the month, so we should
did,
see
but I know there's been
through.
another spray programmed very soon, very shortly. Yes.
The challenge they have as well is Sunshine Coast use the same contractors, so it's coordinating with them to make sure that everyone gets their fair share.
And my second question is to the CEO with regard to staff training. Underspend to 50k year to date. Noting that a further 58k is committed to supplies for future training, but what's the remaining year to completion budget for training?
The Ford program shows that by 30 June the entire staff training budget will be spent.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Nice to see. And nice to hear from James. Good to see we finally achieved full implementation of staff training in a year.
It being 121 on the recorded for history.
I'll take that as 1 out of 5. Yep.
Yeah, just a question. Going forward, you continually return at 2.6 higher than the Bloomberg average, and going forward, you think we can continue to do that? What's your long-term view economically, or what are they telling you? What's your crystal ball telling you our opportunities, the return on investment, I guess, staying up there?
The longer term deposits are actually coming back because they're factoring in a bit of risk.
Yeah.
So we're doing well at the moment, but I think it'll come back a touch.
Yeah, okay. No, it's good, very good. Good return on investment.
One other, waste management contract services, 275 below year-to-date budget. That's a significant expenditure reduction for a year with such a large contract. Where are we making our savings there?
It's more of a timing issue regarding some of the landfill costs.
Okay.
They're about to start a fairly comprehensive concrete crushing program.
I saw that elsewhere.
They've actually brought some funds in VR3 to deal with that as well. So they're going to go a big crush, and then they can. But obviously, there's a timing issue because they have a fairly substantial concrete crushing budget, which makes up a fair bit of that.
Okay, that's it. I just wondered if that related to that previous item. There was something about concrete crushing in there.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right.
And Chair, just a question with regards to the Sunshine Beach shops at the page 55. You got 2 vacancies currently being negotiated. We ticked off one recently, or is this 2 more?
But
so we've
the one that we just
ticked off.
Yep.
So there's still one.
Still one that we're negotiating. Yep.
Is it a major one, or
that's
one?
the big shop?
Big shop, yeah.
That's still vacant. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Have we got any closer to?
We are in negotiation.
Good. That's what I wanted.
Good to hear.
Yeah. The other councillors wish to speak to the motion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, Trent.
Thanks, Trent.
I move that we move to a confidential session in order to deal with item number 3.
Second.
Councillor Pardon seconded. We will make the final
You moving the motion?
Give us a minute, we'll get the video going.
Oh yeah, of course.
We open the door?
Yep.
Oh yeah.
So what do we do in our open session now? We're back in.
We'll just
We
list
can't
the
do much in
recommendations.
Okay,
Really,
good
all you can do is moving the recommendation.
Yeah.
And you know, if you want to talk or argue about the detail, you have to close the meeting.
Okay. All right.
You got to respect
Are we on yet?
confidentiality.
Yes.
Before Pete normally does.
Oh, I don't know if
these,
we are.
Yes.
Are we back on?
Looks like we
Yes,
are.
yes.
It's a while ago.
All right, councillor, well, I'll move that the recommendation with the change that we authorise the Chief Executive Officer to negotiate the purchase of Lot 3 RP 186809 up to the valuation obtained by Council.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Pardon. I don't wish to speak to the motion. Any of the councillors wish to speak to the motion?
I just will briefly is just to thank the community member that brought this block of land to my attention and its values, which led to the investigation by staff. So it's great that the community are on the lookout for what might be good areas to go into our conservation estate.
Yeah, I'll just endorse those comments, Mr. Chair. Had a talk to staff about this particular block, and for me it was a no-brainer.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. That is the end of the meeting. Thank you, councillors, for your